Okay, so I've been doing a lot of dabbling in my adventures in streaming, as I call them. Recently, I've caught 4 or 5 films that uh, I really, I really liked to varying degrees, um, and I'd like to talk about all of them. But tonight's not the night, and I don't know if I'm going to do, you know, a two-in-one video, or each some will have their own video, or I don't know. But I wanted to strike while the iron was hot. But uh, right now I'm a bit over medicated, and really not over because I have a severe problem. I dislocated my shoulder, and it moves around a lot. I got faulty service at the emergency room. That could be a whole other video, not a blue review. Just but in any case, I finally was able to sleep fairly well, normally, for several hours tonight. All the drugs just kind of finally shut my system down and quieted most of this down. So, I mean, I'm still wearing pain patches here, so I feel like Deathlock the Demolisher. I've got this little thing right here on one shoulder. Uh, Rich Buckler fans will catch that reference. Um, and I have Frankenstein here. Young Frankenstein is adorned with the spaghetti western style hat that I often wear, which was a wonderful find. I had an ancient one that I wore for years, and it just eventually got too worn. It was a vintage one from 1910. I bought it in 1989, I believe. I wore that thing everywhere. I had a cheap kind of vinyl substitute in the early 2010s, and it didn't quite fit my head. It was a little embarrassing looking back at pictures and videos, but this one fits perfectly. I love it. I get a lot of compliments for it. I hope I don't get compliments from it, but I get compliments for it, mostly from women, which is a good thing. So anyway, I'm going to talk about one of the movies that. Oh, calm down, man. Talking about one of the movies that I that I lucked into here with this Arrow Spring sale. So this one's called KEOMA. KEOMA. All right. So, and you guys who have seen the movie know why I'm doing that falsetto little riff there. The artwork is really beautiful. The new artwork for Arrow, I'm just stunned by it. Really. This is, to me, as an iconic character in Italian genre film. Maybe not to everyone, but not everyone. So the thing about KEOMA here, why don't you hold up KEOMA? The thing about KEOMA is it's one of the last of the spaghetti westerns proper of that era, which began in the early-ish to mid 1960s. They kind of exploded for almost 10 years. It was a durable genre, much like the Giallo, and like the Giallo, many were churned out. Some very quickly, maybe most very quickly and very cheaply. That's not to say they weren't of some quality, because as I've discussed on this channel previously, like the Japanese, the Italians were big on. I mean, I don't know if it's like deliberate plan, but they just had this ethos where they were capable of high level craftsmanship on a very low budget, working very quickly, and they just had an eye. They had an eye for composition, for costuming, for cinematography, for editing sometimes, and definitely for music. The soundtracks for the majority of the more well known and well-loved spaghetti westerns and giallos are simply wonderful in music. I mean, really, some of the most incredible music ever recorded by humans. Definitely some of the best soundtrack stuff, and also some of the most underrated and under-discussed in America. They're that, through the cult, through the interwebs, the cult film community has managed to push some of this to the surface. and so people are hearing them to where you get a situation like Quentin Tarantino basically taking the incredible soundtrack for the movie Django in 1966 and pretty much pasting it onto his modern Django film with Jamie Foxx. And I'm not sure how many people realize that that was already a soundtrack for another movie. You know, I thought that was one of the more crass things that he's done. But there are so many that it's we could be here all day. Um, but you know, to hear younger people, millennials saying, singing KEOMA, the original theme song, and loving it, that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. You know, but anyway, KEOMA was never used in a KEOMA's theme was not used in a Quentin Tarantino film. I think his target audience, if he has one, that demographic would really mock the soundtrack because of its extravagances and overindulgences. But we'll get to that in a second. 1976, Enzo G. Castellari, great prolific director, super nice guy, full of ideas, always ideas, and not all of them were realized on the screen. Not all of his story ideas were shot the way he wanted them because I think he aspired to not just have make films of a certain caliber of craftsmanship as far as within genre, like I mentioned earlier, using that kind of Italian ethos of, it's going to look good no matter, and it's going to sound good no matter how how hackneyed it is. But hold on one second, I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. Also of note that's interesting is that Tarantino loved Castellari's work also, and remade one of his movies, Inglourious Basterds, misspelling one letter sarcastically from the traditional bastards to bastards. I've gotten to some really wild debates with some people over that film. People insisting it's not a remake. It absolutely is a remake by any metric that you usually apply to what a remake is. However, I don't like that film. I don't like it at all, really. A lot of people love it, swear by it, but as you guys know, I'm not a big Tarantino fan. He's not really somebody that I'm passionate about. I try not to ever mention him. I don't have any of his movies on any of my lists of things that I enjoy, except for Jackie Brown. That's my favorite by him. But anyway, Inglourious Basterds was another famous or infamous Castellari film made several years after KEOMA about World War II. Soldiers on this impossible mission, and anyway. But it's just a coincidence that the Tarantino's movie has the same title and has that plot. It's just a coincidence. But I've been told that before. Perhaps being on the internet and not knowing others' situations, the person telling me that could have been under the influence of mind-altering chemicals. I don't know. I don't care. But anyway, KEOMA is to be. I've seen a lot of Castellari's Police and Pesci movies. I think he did like Convoy Busters, Heroin Busters. Gosh, he's got a long list here. I'm just gonna real. It's pretty stunning, really. The stuff he did: Cold Eyes of Fear, High Crime, Street Law, Big Racket, Heroin Busters, Inglourious Basterds. The Shark Under, The Last Shark with Deodato by Deodato. 1990, The Bronx Warriors, The New Barbarians, Escape from the Bronx. And he later did a KEOMA-esque film with Franco Nero called Jonathan of the Bears in 1994, his next to last film he ever directed. But anyway, he has a great fondness for this one that comes out in interviews, as does Franco Nero, the star. So what the hell is KEOMA about? KEOMA is about basically a landowner named Shannon, last name, played by William Berger, and he, playing a character a bit older than he really is, with makeup on, and uh, he has 4 children. He has 3, legitimate children, and he has one illegitimate child, KEOMA, by an Indian woman. Of course, Franco Nero does not look half Native American, but he really went all out of the costuming. He collaborated with the costumer to create the singular look, which I find just fascinating. Like, this look is the kind of stripped down look here, but there's also scenes where he's got the hat and the trench coat. He's wearing the hat in this picture. This close up here in this montage. Woody Strode. See, that's who reminds me of this Frankenstein thing. Is this Woody Strode picture. And the ever lovely Olga Karlatos. So it's hard to do a review that's really does justice to this movie. I mean, throwing 10 minutes of factoids out there. I hope you learned something, or just amused by my general goofiness. But I do love this film. It's been with me a long time. I saw it on Anchor Bay DVD in the early 2000s. I had never seen it before, and I had read about it in the cult movie magazines and stuff. Sorry, man, dehydrated. And I knew it had Franco Nero. I knew it was a spaghetti western. I think I vaguely had awareness that it was an Indian name, Native American name. I'm sorry. I'm part Native American, so if I slip and say Indian once in a while and don't qualify it with like Asiatic Indian, then surely you guys know I mean I'm Native American, and I'm not being insulting. So, and that's all I knew about KEOMA. So I bought Sight Unseen, as I did many times back then, an Anchor Bay DVD, and I was rarely disappointed by the quality of the film itself and the beauty of the restoration. So they did a good job on it. But it pales before this. This is a definitive. I think this is going to should put Castellari on the map. I know it's been out a couple of years here, and it's been written about quite a bit. I've ignored most of the reviews so as not to kind of color my own, but the ones I have read have been really wonderful, and I couldn't be happier for Castellari and company, because I think it's kind of a milestone. There was, again, they called them these Twilight Westerns, where the genre was dying out. A notable one from slightly earlier than this is Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. I'm not Four Horsemen. Four of the Apocalypse by Lucio Fulci, which I also got on Anchor Bay and had not seen before. It is one of my very favorite spaghetti westerns. I don't know when it's coming out on Blu-ray. I'm really eager to see it in that format. But anyway, this is the definitive restored KEOMA. It's gorgeous to look at. So, what does Castellari do that makes it gorgeous to look at? It's basically, it's all set in one town. I mean, there are some horse riding in the distance on the fields. They have shots of that. It's a western, and but it's a desolate town, and it's controlled by this fucking guy named Caldwell, played by Donald O'Brien. He was quite an over the top character in real life and in movies. And the 3 brothers of KEOMA, they're like basically spellbound. They're like his enforcers, and essentially they're just bullies that fuck around people, And the reason that Caldwell uses to clamp down on the town is that there's been a plague. So anyone who has the plague is ostracized, and the 3 brothers enforce this narrative that these people basically are subhuman. Does this remind you of anything that's happened in recent history in our world? It did me. very strong COVID parallels here. I mean, obviously unintentional. I'm not saying Castellari is a prophet or Montefiori. Luigi Montefiori, aka George Eastman, created this character, wrote this film. It did have some rewrites by one of the actors. I think it's John Lafredo or Joshua Sinclair. He was an American actor and apparently a Shakespearean nut. And he provided his own dialogue and rewrote some for Franco, Nero, and company. And of course, Castellari shaped Montefiori's script into something, I guess, maybe more palatable, more commercial. I'm not saying this is a mainstream film; it absolutely is not. But for the market of the time as an export and in Italy. There's a great interview with Montefiore on here, and he wanted this Western to be even weirder and darker and more mystical. He said, it's not like it's going to be Al Topo by Jodorowsky, but you know what I mean. And I liked his attitude. Montefiore, he's a trip as an actor, writer, and a raconteur. He's quite a trip. So, and he's super tall. And that's one reason they wouldn't let him cast himself in his script, because he claimed that Franco Nero was only 5'6". And man, that made me feel good because I'm only 5'3". So, yay for us little guys. So, Montefiore's script was kind of shaped and restructured, sometimes obviously during shooting and on set. And, these productions could be pretty raw, and parts didn't have scripts finished when they started shooting. Of course, the actors are all speaking in their own native language, which has to be overdubbed and looped later. Fortunately, Franco Nero and a couple of the other actors were able to dub their own voices into their performances, but quite a few were not. So KEOMA has been away a long time. He's been in the Civil War, and he fought for the North. This whole film, really, when it comes to dialogue and interplay between characters, it's really Nero playing off of another character. In other words, a character says something to KEOMA or asks just like an ordinary question, and KEOMA responds with an aphorism. He responds with a lofty philosophical, when are you going to stop killing, KEOMA? I must survive. It's like, okay. When you have been gone so long, you end up where you began. The world, it keeps turning and turning, and you'll find yourself right where you always were. And yes, he uses his real accent, and it's incongruous, but in a beautiful way. I think this is a mystical movie. I think, basically when he comes back to this plague-ridden town to see his father, he doesn't know of the ravages that the plague and Caldwell and his butchers have perpetrated, but this old woman follows him, and the movie opens with them talking or yelling aphorisms at each other. I don't know if they're really having a real conversation. And she's like an old crone-like woman. I don't mean that as an insult. Her eyes are beautiful. The actress, I think, was made up to look slightly older than she really was. I forgot her name, but she was middle-aged. The extras on here cover everything about this movie. That's one beautiful thing. So that's where I'm getting a lot of these anecdotes, albeit, flubbing them. But she carries around this cart behind her, this little two-wheeled cart, and it's like her burden. And there's always winds blowing and dust and dirt that settles in the faces of people. A little reminiscent of some of Sergio Martino's dirtier work in spaghetti westerns, though he prefers mud. And then a little reminiscent, of course, of Django, the very first one by Sergio Corbucci, where Django's dragging his own coffin through the mud. And, I would never want to roll around in mud. I think I did once when I was a kid. I hated it. I'm not even that into standing out in the rain. So have these actors constantly fighting and jumping around in the mud and the dirt and the dust. Man, they had some fortitude. They were dedicated to their craft. Nobody does that this kind of stuff casually in movies anymore. For a while they may have done it climactically in action scenes only, and then now it's all CGI for the most part, so they don't have to do that. Um, but this one isn't an unrelentingly dirty film. But yeah, there's some mud, there's some dirt, there's some grime. This is a like decayed town. This is a town that's dilapidated and deteriorated. You could barely call it a town. A proverbial ghost town. And this old woman pops up from time to time, and she's death. She is the representative of death. She is a witch. But then within the framework of the movie, I think they make clear that she's at the very least a witch, a gypsy, a seeress. But in Montefiori's original script, she absolutely is death, death itself incarnate. And in my head canon, I tend to incorporate some of Montefiori's ideas because they're ideas that, while not necessarily shot or portrayed, literally on screen, can still be inferred. And the interview with him on here is very in depth about what he intended versus what was shot, all the differences, and it's really wonderful. I mean, because he did it a long time ago, and a lot of people who do these interviews, obviously this is 25, 35, 45 years ago they've done these films, and they're trying to remember the details, and it's a little fuzzy, but some people have really sharp memories, and I think this is just a theory, I think when you create something that's a little more than just a work for hire, a hack work, and you feel it, you really like it, you really, it's something that comes from you, comes through you as a creator. This happens to me, so I'm just saying, you tend to remember all the details, or many details that other people wouldn't think about, because it's in your head, it's come through you, you've channeled those characters, those scenarios, and that's how Montefiori is with KEOMA. It's quite wonderful, and Franco Nero also has a great memory, and he is very. There's a new interview with him on here. He is very emotional guy. There was an older Anchor Bay interview with him on the Anchor Bay disc that I wish they'd ported over, where he talks about KEOMA, and near the end he almost starts crying. He almost starts crying in a lot of those 2000s interviews on Anchor Bay DVDs. Sensitive guy, really, and his eyes, beautiful blue eyes, and but this is a much older, 10 years plus on Franco Nero on this interview talking about the film, and he still gets a little bit emotional, but he's very precise in his details. He's very precise about the personalities of the people he worked with, the script itself, the film itself, the filming, and most of all, the character and the themes of the film. So I've told you the setup, and it's problematic for KEOMA because he was the half-breed outcast, and so he didn't fit into the other three brothers' view of, what their family should be, because they were all racist bastards, and their father favored KEOMA above the others, though. So there's this hatred and jealousy, and yes, there is a Shakespearean quality to it. Shannon is portrayed as a very kind of stoic, kind man, fair. He's the antithesis of the character Caldwell, and this conflict serves as the backdrop through which KEOMA walks. And of course, that's a common idea in spaghetti westerns, all the way to Yojimbo, which was remade as A Fistful of Dollars. We could argue over that being a remake or not, but watching both, yes, Fistful of Dollars absolutely is a remake of Yojimbo. Some of the dialogue is even the same, but these guys wander into this situation. It happens in Django too. They wander into a situation where you have these warring factions, often involving battles over land, racial tension. One set of whites versus one set of Mexicans or Indians, and and that person, at first, is a badass and dispatches people right and left, and ends up choosing his side, and then being brutally maimed for it, and then he makes a comeback and annihilates all the bad guys, and even the ones on his own side. Um, that's the archetypal plot. I mean, it runs through all of these movies, all the ones that I mentioned. Manaha is like that, or Manaja is like that. Um, yeah, a lot. Anyway, Once Upon a Time in the West. Um, there's another really archetypal one I was thinking of, but I've forgotten. You could say For the Apocalypse. Stubby Preston, played by Fabio Testi, comes into this town with all these kind of and blends in with these characters considered losers by the town. Such a wonderful film by Fulci, and so this is no different. So, and I'm not condemning it for having that formula. I like the way it pulls off the formula. I like the fact that KEOMA is he's portrayed as a well-rounded character with a lot more depth than you usually see in spaghetti western. The Great Silence, that's another example. The bounty hunters, the killers of the bounty hunters versus the denizens of the snowbound town. And here comes Silence, and of course he has a connection and a grudge. Much like in these other movies, like in Once Upon a Time in the West, the character often called the Man, played by Charles Bronson. He has a secret vendetta against Frank, played by Henry Fonda. So KEOMA's grudge is his three brothers. That's really the grudge they hold against him, and now he's an adult, and they can't bully him anymore. And he's like, fuck you, and he doesn't actually say that, but through this mystical kind of tableau, you get these flashbacks where Franco Nero himself is within his own past. Kind of like if you dream a scene from your past, something playing out, and then adult you is watching and walking around, and you're seeing yourself as a kid, and you're seeing it objectively. And that device is used a couple of times in here. Marvelously done visually, and it's not like the first time that had ever been done, and it certainly wasn't the last, but it's very distinctive within this film, to where he's physically like a ghost. No one can see him, but it's hard to describe without you seeing it. And once you see it, you'll be like, Henry, man, come on, it's been done a million times before. It's no big deal. But it struck me that way, and in interviews with Castellari and Nero in here, they were very proud of those scenes because they are representative of someone's psychology. They're a little more psychological than most westerns, and Once Upon a Time in the West does not use that device, but its flashbacks and the way it uses the flashbacks is also psychological, and there's a lot of psychological tropes used throughout these films. One is like the music box that's used in Leone, and of course a lot of Dario Argento, and it triggers the memories. It symbolizes the time. There's always some kind of what's that 80s song? There's always something there to remind you, and it's true. The persistence of memory, as Dolly said, it's really kind of permeates these films, or at least a subtext. But oftentimes it's a key part of the motivation, the motor, the engine that's driving the seemingly inscrutable hero. So KEOMA is absolutely no exception. This thing's psychological, mystical. It's brutal, it's bloody, it's it's funny, unintentionally or not, at times, because the character KEOMA mocks all his enemies, with his aphorisms. He's like it's like El Topo. He's going to bludgeon them to death with philosophy, and but I got to say he does it for a lot longer than El Topo. El Topo doesn't speak as much, and he changes halfway through the movie and gains enlightenment. Whereas KEOMA just goes up forward through the whole movie. And of course, they take the symbolism to extreme. He's crucified on a giant wagon wheel. Incredible visual. And come on, dude, sit there. And tormented by the brothers, and the whole time he's protecting this character known only as the woman, and played by Olga Karlatos, and she's pregnant, and she allegedly has the plague. So all this prejudice comes up, and it's like, we can't have her around. She's got the plague. And the way these people are talking, it really did remind me a lot of the rhetoric against unvaccinated people during the COVID situation, and it was a little creepy at times, but interestingly prescient. The other key character is George, played by Woody Strode. He was a slave held by Shannon, and then he was freed, and but he knew the family since they were growing up. He knew all four of the brothers and Shannon, and in the flashbacks he's got a wig. He had hair then. It's Woody Strode always shaved his head, and so then you get the modern Woody Strode, and he's sporting the clean cut look, and he's very gaunt. In real life he's approaching middle age or at middle age. Still incredibly muscular, very tall, lean. I'm pretty certain Woody Strode was not only black but also part Native American, also, and had just incredible cheekbones. And he's really one of my favorite performers. I can't say he had a chance to really act a lot, but of course he's in Black Jesus, which I've reviewed on this channel. He's amazing in that movie, and of course he's famous as the titular but not main character in Sergeant Rutledge by John Ford. I mean, the movie revolves around his character, but he's like sixth or seventh billed because he was black. Really, I honestly believe that's why. Because they're not going to give the black guy, in the top 3-4 actor billing, even if he is the title character. And that was an injustice. But at least he had the exposure. He did really great work, and the film did have a message in his favor. But yeah, just love Woody Strode, and George is kind of dissolute. He's a heavy alcoholic. He lets people kind of beat him and degrade him, and one of the brothers pisses on him, and I mean, and the expression he has when that happens is just, he acts with his face so strongly, these really deep set eyes and gaunt cheekbones, and he's just like, whatever, just I've given up, I've given up on everything. And Frank, when he was like, what happened to you, George? What's wrong with you? And at one point he gets really angry. He needs George to help him with something, and George is starting to become slightly sober in helping KEOMA and get this woman away who's being hunted. Olga Karlatos, and he says something like, come on, I'm talking to you, and he uses the N-word, and then he's like, George is shocked and not shocked, and he's like, it gives him the information and then he needs, and then KEOMA settles down, and he's like, I am sorry, George, I did not mean it. And see, that's just it. Even he, a half-breed, was trained, was brainwashed. He was born way before the Civil War, so and fought in it, and he had some of that racism ingrained in him, even though George was around and helped raise his kids. It came out. I think it's a strong commentary on, the way racism operates on all these different levels, the way it's, ingrained itself or woven itself so deeply into the fabric of the way white people are conditioned in America to view people of color, but even black people, like my father was a racist, but he liked Native Americans. He was fascinated with them, uh, and it's like this hierarchy of racism. It's like Native Americans are okay, Asians are all right, but black people, and that's the way I was not raised, but that's the environment in which I was raised. Let's put it that way. Luckily, my mom told me just to ignore all that bullshit, and so I never really got racism, and I still don't really. Honestly, like from a rational point of view, I go, well, okay, so we're all different. Okay, can we move on? Um, but America never has moved on, and that's what's sad about it. Um, and especially during that time of change with the Reconstruction, uh, it was cool to put that in there. And when Nero, KEOMA is questioning George over what happened to him, you know, George is like, well, I was freed, and I thought that was gonna be the way, and then I found out I was wrong, and I mean, I just let myself drink and drink, and I'm mildly paraphrasing, but I think it's really that he didn't get the opportunities he wanted to. I would say plot wise, part of that's because he lingered in that town, and as it was taken over by Caldwell, and then as the plague hit, George had no job opportunities. He was like a town pariah, and so alcohol was all he had. He he had been physically strong. He had been a master archer, and but he was never accepted. I mean, Shannon, I guess, accepted him, but Shannon didn't really help him all that much. And so it's up to KEOMA to kind of go, man, you're a human being, you're my friend, and they do become close again, and great interplay. And so those three characters, KEOMA, the woman, and George, are really the protagonists. Shannon is kind of on the fence. He says a lot of blustery things to his sons, the evil ones, and he accepts KEOMA lovingly, but he doesn't stand up to Caldwell. He's kind of a pussy, and sorry, and so ultimately he's destroyed. And when he's destroyed, of course, the brothers turn on Caldwell, obviously, and of course KEOMA goes wild. By this time, George has been killed trying to help KEOMA. Incredible death scene. Oh my God, it's like those warrior instincts he had from when he was this muscle bound archer in the flashbacks comes back, and he starts doing this Indian, really much more high pitched than that. It's almost like, yeah, this is his war dance. This is him fighting to the death. He takes a few people out, but he's killed rather brutally and sadly. And so there's a lot of despair in this film. It's not as bleak as The Great Silence, but it's more bleak than Django. I don't know if there's like a bleakness scale. For the Apocalypse is pretty damn bleak, but it has a little more humor in it than this, intentional or otherwise. So that's KEOMA in a nutshell. And of course, KEOMA is in enacting this whole scenario with returning to the town, stopping Caldwell, which wasn't his original mission. He really didn't give a fuck about that initially. He was like, he's too cool for school. He was the man without a name, though he had a name, and but he was like, this is the guy who comes into town and no one fucks with. Like I said, the archetypal spaghetti western hero figure. And I would not call KEOMA an anti-hero. I would call him a hero who kills because he has to. And like he says, I have to survive. And a lot of his motivations are oblique and philosophical, whether he addresses them to all the various characters or to the old woman we keep seeing. But their interplay, it's like she is kind of, and especially as Montefiori claims he originally initially envisioned this, is that death is following him, that she was cheated of KEOMA in this scenario in which this land is ravaged and his Indian mother is killed, and which we do see part of that flashback in this version, but he had written more exposition around it and more flashbacks to where you see that uh, death is dogging KEOMA's heels because he cheated death. It's metaphorical and it's literal. He literally cheated death. And so there's this game between the two of them. And Castellari said, when he got this set up from Montefiori, he immediately thought of Ingmar Bergman's Seventh Seal. This warrior who probably should have died in battle, approached by death, and then he's like, okay, I'll play you a chess game for my life. And in this one, KEOMA's he's not running away from death. He's just doing his thing. He's just wandering, and as he puts it, he's just trying to survive. I mean, it's really a tragic kind of the survivor, the hero who is like the survivor, the perpetual survivor, no matter how much he or she, a lot of female characters like this too, in action and genre movies, or even violent drama movies, that survival instinct, all the way down to the slashers, The Last Girl, and Wolverine and the X-Men movies, I'm a survivor, bub. I'm a survivor, and it's like, I'm a survivor. I mean, in real life, I consider myself a survivor, and I've had to be one. And so these characters deeply resonate with me on that level. And with Franco Nero as well. In his interview, he said he feels KEOMA closer to his heart than most of his characters he's played. Because KEOMA he could go anywhere and do anything. He's one man, self-contained. He can take care of himself. Now he does get kind of almost broken in this movie, as these characters often do. They're seemingly invincible at first, something happens, and you find out they are human too, and they become overwhelmed by the forces of the two sides that are, that he's walked into the conflict of. And this is no different. But there's some amazing stuff in here. Some great lines, great action set pieces, some wild philosophy. So I'll get to the part of the movie winding up here that's contentious with people is the Guido and Maurizio De Angelis musical score, which Castellari wanted them to use vocals instead of all just music, the way a lot of these soundtracks were. I mean, like Morricone used like choruses of female singers, but that's different. This is like songs with lyrics, and Castellari got these two, and they had a collaborator. I wanted to get this person's name correct if I could. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it in time, but you never know, man. You never know. So let's see. All right, Guido and Maurizio. They had a group called Oliver Onions, and they scored many movies, especially spaghetti westerns. And their main collaborator in Oliver Onions was someone named Susan Duncan Smith, a British-born journalist who worked in the Foreign Relationships Department. She advised them. It says she was their frequent collaborator and lyricist. So she had them do the Oliver Onions thing, in which they scored like Sandokan and then a whole bunch of films and television series. So Yor, The Hunter from the Future. But not all these. A lot of these are under their names, the two brothers, like this one was, but a lot were under Oliver Onions. So, so this is essentially an Oliver Onions soundtrack, as I interpret this information. European film experts like Robert Monell could definitely tell me if I'm correct or not. But as I see it, that's got to be Susan is singing. One of the brothers is singing the lead male, and then Susan is singing the female. And if it's not Susan, I apologize. I'm wrong about that, but I think it's her. And the male vocals, yes, are like Leonard Cohen. The female vocals are very high pitched. Some say a little off key or tone deaf. Uh, it's a very catchy theme. It's a very tragic theme, but the lyrics serve as a Greek chorus. And so, almost to the point where too much of a Greek chorus, like something's happening on screen, and here comes Guido, and he's like telling you, you are imprisoned by the bad guy. You are, and you're like, oh, what the fuck? And that has put off a lot of people to KEOMA. I think it bothered Tim Lucas a good bit, and I know I have some friends that did too. Um, I have learned to accept it because if I kind of block out the redundant lyrics and some of the notes they hit with the male and female singers hit, the music itself, the melodies are great and they are haunting and they are memorable, and the female voice is better than the male voice. It's a very pleading voice, and to me, it's kind of like it might be death. What death is saying to KEOMA. And the male vocals could be too. It's the third person narrative. It's like this omnipotent or omniscient being, which is Oliver Onions, the witch, the crone, death herself, is telling KEOMA what's happening. Kind of like in the old Iron Fist comic books, used to always be that. I use the third person. There's a lot to enjoy in this film. Great interviews, like I said, with Nero and Castellari. And Montefiori, and some other people too. The editor, one of the supporting actors, KEOMA in the twilight of the spaghetti western, and a great introduction to KEOMA by Alex Cox, who knows his shit with spaghetti westerns. I'm going to wrap up. I don't want to go over my 50-minute. I'm on a 45 to 50-minute limit in my head, and I'm trying to whittle it down to 40. But me. Long live KEOMA!